what is a sundown town, and why did you decide to write this article?
Sundown towns are towns where either on paper, in a law, or in housing contracts, Black people basically weren't allowed to live there. They're called sundown towns because oftentimes Black people were allowed to work there, usually in butler or nanny capacities, but they weren't allowed to own homes there. So if they were there after sundown, they would either be escorted out by law enforcement, escorted out by the threat of violence by an angry mob, or actually faced real violence. And I wanted to write about this because a lot of the time when we talk about racism and our country's history with it, we don't talk about how racism looked in the North.
What is the difference between what we're talking about when it comes to sundown towns versus segregation, or, as you referenced, the racism that people were facing down south?
So I think the big difference is the legality, right? So sundown towns didn't all have the same laws and same practices, but what kind of gives them the term sundown town is that somewhere they were explicitly being anti-Black, whether it was in housing policies. For instance, a lot of the Grosse Pointes and a lot of Detroit suburbs had it in housing contracts that you weren't allowed to sell this home to a Black family, even, when Black families could afford to buy the house. Or other times there were laws literally saying Black people aren't allowed to be here after dark.
How are some of the remnants of these sundown towns and that segregation still, with us today?
Racial profiling in police. And it's something that people really push back on this idea, but it's actually quite simple. If you live in a suburb that is 90+% white, and you see a group of Black kids driving through it, the police automatically look at them as outsiders. And I think that actually is where a lot of the implicit bias against young Black men particularly comes from when it comes to law enforcement. It's, you're in an area that historically you have never been in. What are you doing here? It automatically brings up suspicion. And instead of, seeing me as someone who's going home after visiting a friend, I'm now someone who's seen as a suspect in some wrongdoing.
One of the things you touch on that is kind of an example of that is the recent billboard outside of Livonia, which said, driving while Black, racial profiling just ahead. Welcome to Livonia. So when you talk to law enforcement, what was their reaction to, the notion of sundown towns and that billboard?
The Livonia police did not like the billboard. And I don't think any police officer would. It's putting them in a box of, you don't like Black people, you're suspicious of Black drivers. And what I think the billboard really is trying to do is have us start a conversation about those things, about that very real history and that very real practice of seeing Black drivers as suspicious. So the Livonia police chief actually pushed back against it and says, we never teach that. We don't encourage racial profiling. That's not something that we're trying to do. Yet when you have a whole community of people who feel like, well, that's something that's happened to me, that's something that I've experienced, you can't just negate that experience.
How are these suburbs changing their respective histories?
Some cities like Ferndale have really changed their reputation. Ferndale, to many people's surprise when I published the piece, was a sundown town. But now Ferndale is seen as this very progressive, liberal place where everyone is accepted, in large part because their acceptance of the LGBTQ community. And right. I don't know about you, but when I see a pride flag, I feel a lot safer because I'm like, if they like gay people, there's a chance they don't hate Black people. It's not always true,
just a little
but
bit,
it's just a chance. Yeah. It makes me feel just a little bit more comfortable.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think a lot of these suburbs have really changed their reputation just with the influx of new people coming in.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.